Now an extraordinary story from the Second World War, a humanitarian story that didn't come to light for decades. It concerns a young Londoner named Nicholas Winston who went to Prague and ended up saving the lives of 669 children, mostly Jews, from almost certain death. His story begins at the end of 1938 with Europe on the brink of war. In Germany, violence against Jews was escalating, and the infamous Munich Agreement paved the way for Hitler's armies to march unopposed into Czechoslovakia. In London, Nicholas Winston had been following events and knew that refugees fleeing the Nazis were in dire straits. He went to Czechoslovakia to see if there was anything he could do to help. What's strange is that for almost 50 years he hardly told anyone about what he had accomplished. And for 50 years, the children knew nothing about who had saved them or how. We begin on October 1st, 1938. Nazi troops marched into the Sudetenland, the German-speaking region of Czechoslovakia. Prague, the Czech capital, was flooded with desperate people trying to escape. A fortunate few were able to send their children abroad. These parents, mostly Czech Jews, sensed war was coming and wanted to get their children out. By chance, a cameraman filmed a man holding a boy, a 29-year-old Londoner. His name, Nicholas Winston.
All I knew was that the people that I met couldn't get out, and they were looking of ways of at least getting their children out.
Nicholas Winston is one of the few people who can bear witness to those days because he's 104 years old. He told us he went to Prague to see if he might be able to save some people. But what made you think you could do it?
I work on the motto that if something's not impossible, there must be a way of doing it.
Back in London, Winston was a successful stockbroker living the good life with a passion for sports. But he was deeply concerned about news reports from Czechoslovakia of German persecution.
I went out into the camps where the people who had been displaced were put, and it was winter and it was cold.
Emigration wasn't an option. The world's doors were closed to the refugees. Conditions in the camps were brutal for the 150,000 people trapped there, especially for the children, and no one focused on them until Nicholas Winston. But what did he do? We went to Jerusalem, to Yad Vashem, Israel's memorial to the victims of the Holocaust, and asked Dr. David Silberklang, a senior historian there.
And Winston went, set up shop in a hotel in the center of the old city in Prague, and began looking into how can I organize getting some of these refugees, particularly the children, out of here.
What kind of experience did he have to qualify him for this immense bureaucratic task?
None.
Winston set up a small organization with one aim, to get as many kids out as fast as possible. By the time he returned to London, he had a list of hundreds of children and set out to convince British authorities to take him seriously. He did it by taking stationery from an established refugee organization, adding children's section, and making himself chairman.
So that eventually they had to adopt me.
So in fact, you managed to do what you did through a little deception, a little smoke and mirrors.
Yes, to a certain extent, yes.
It required quite a bit of ingenuity.
No, it just required a printing press to get the notepaper printed.
The children's section operated from a tiny office in central London. Winston's mother was in charge. The staff were all volunteers. During the day, Winston worked as a stockbroker. Evenings, he wrestled with the British bureaucracy. Britain agreed to accept the children, but only if Winston found families willing to take them in. So he circulated the children's pictures to advertise them. But even after a family chose a child, British authorities were slow in issuing travel documents. So Winston started having them forged. He also spread some money around. The first 20 children left Prague on March 14, 1939. Over the spring and summer of 1939, 7 trains carried over 600 children through the heart of Nazi Germany to Holland, where they took a ferry to the English coast. From there, they caught a train to London. An 8th train, carrying 250 more, was scheduled to leave Prague on September 1st. But that's the day the war began.
They were all at the station, even on the train waiting to go, and war was declared, so the train never left. Never heard really what happened to all those children.
And Nicholas Winston, during the war he volunteered for an ambulance unit for the Red Cross, then trained pilots for the Royal Air Force. He got married, raised a family, earned a comfortable living. For 50 years, he told hardly anyone what he had done. A question which I know intrigues everyone who hears your story is, why did you keep it secret for so long?
I didn't really keep it secret, I just didn't talk about it.
In 1988, the BBC learned about Winston's story and invited him to be part of a program. He had no idea that the people sitting around him were people he had saved.
Can I ask, is there anyone in our audience tonight who owes their life to Nicholas Winston? If so, could you stand up, please? Mr. Winston, would you like to turn round? On behalf of all of them, thank you very much indeed.
I suppose it was the most emotional moment of my life, suddenly being confronted with all these children who weren't by any means children anymore.
No, they weren't, and for the first time, they looked at you and knew that you were the reason that they were alive.
Yeah. True.
I wore this around my neck, and this is the actual pass that we were given to come to England, and I'm another of the children that you face.
Lady Milena Grenfell Baines describes Winston as one of the most modest people she's ever met.
Why do you think he didn't say anything for 50 years?
I think it was in his nature. He really felt that he'd done all he could, and having got those children settled, he felt, being there, done that, my job's done, I've got other things to do.
Sir Nicholas Winston.
In 2003, Winston was knighted and became Sir Nicholas Winston. In the Czech Republic, he's become a national hero. He was celebrated in a documentary called Nicky's Family, but he isn't really comfortable with all the adulation.
I'm not interested in the past. I think there's too much emphasis nowadays on the past and what has happened, and nobody is concentrating on the present and the future.
In 1939, Nicholas Winston used a 2-week vacation to go to Prague and ended up saving the lives of 669 children. In the decades since, of course, the children had children who then had children, and so on, and the numbers multiplied. I want to summarize it in one sentence. A guy takes a 2-week vacation
And ends up with 15,000 children, yes. Yes.
It's a pretty good story.
It's a great story.
They've got children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren.
And none of them would be here if it hadn't been for Sir Nick.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.